So we're going to move on to our final section of our priorities, which is the priority of racial justice, striving for racial justice. And that's part of our goal for every Londoner, from whatever ethnicity, whatever background, to encounter the love of God in Jesus Christ. Now, you'll know that our Dean of Racial Justice is Alan Bauer from St Saviour's Sunbury. He's not able to be here today, but we do have Stephanie Ajayi from the Racial Justice Priority Group within the diocese, and Stephanie's been helping us in all kinds of ways to kind of think about this area. So I'm going to hand over to Stephanie, who's going to introduce this session. Thank you so much for being here, Stephanie.
Thank you, Bishop Graham. It's Stephanie Ajayi, and sorry, I just thought I'd correct. Sorry, Bishop Graham. Just to give you a bit of background about me, I am currently working with the Diocese of London on the broader racial justice priority with Bishop Joanne and the Racial Justice Priority Group. So as Bishop Graham said, I'm standing in for Reverend Alan today, just talking through racial justice and what that means for the Kensington area. Okay, so I think there are four main aims. Now, there really is quite a lot to racial justice, but what we're trying to do is to distill it in a way that's manageable and meaningful for parishes, because we're really quite aware that you already have a huge amount of work to do. So we're trying to sort of, even though it is a priority for the diocese, we want to do it in a way that it's accessible for everybody. So how we've done that, we've broken it down into four key areas. Now, the first one being representation. Now, obviously we're using the acronym RACE for obvious reasons, but in terms of representation, it's about when you look around your PCCs or your senior leadership team, who do you see? Is it people that look like you? Is there any difference there? What does your own PCC look like within your churches? When was the last time you reached across the aisle and actually said to somebody who was different, how about this? Have you thought about this? Now, I say that as somebody who actually worships in a Church of England church, and I have to tell you, for the 13 years that I've been in that church, no one once has said to me, Steph, have you ever thought about this? So don't underestimate the power of an invitation. And I think that invitation often goes to people that look like us, that sound like us. And this is the biases that we all have that we need to work against. Because you can ask the question, how can I be in a church for 13 years, a Church of England church, and not really know what that structure looks like? Because nobody's bothered to say to me, how about this? Do you know what this means? Because then it actually leads all the way to leadership, to governance. If we look at our deaneries, our diocesan synods, one of the things we're trying to do as the Diocese of London is to actually engender greater diversity across the whole leadership and governance structure. But actually that starts at parish level. So if we're not getting the representation within the PCCs, how are we going to get it within the deaneries, within the diocesan levels, and further up the tree? So we really need to start now. So really representation, and actually for me, I'd like representation to be actually broader. Over time, we really want representation to morph into participation. So it's not a numbers game. It's not a tick box exercise. It's about embracing people who can make a valuable contribution to the church and want to make a valuable contribution to the life of the church. So it's about participation and actually being included. So really that's what the representation's about. And in terms of A is for action. And this is where the church has very sadly been lacking. I think there is over 30 reports that have been commissioned into racial justice. And the latest report from Lament to Action actually synthesizes over 100 recommendations. And what's really sad about that is that over the 30 reports, they've probably been written over 40 years. Not much has changed. Not much has changed, which is why action is so important. We've read the reports. We know what needs to happen. We know what the action needs to be. So that is where the change needs to occur. In the Diocese of London, we have a strategy which is actually on the website. Linked to that strategy is an operational plan that lives and breathes on my laptop. And in that operational plan, it's broken down into 6 key strategic areas and all the actions that we need to do to try and engender greater diversity throughout the structures of the diocese. So that it's going to be a work in progress. There is a long way to go, but that work has begun. And it's about holding people to account, holding the feet to the flames, however we like to term it, but it's the only way we are going to stop having to read a number of reports that keep really telling us the same thing over and over again, and actually move to the action side. Now, in terms of the C, it's all about collecting data. So I would imagine that for your own local context, you should know what your area looks like. What does a representation look like in your area? How is that reflected in your churches? How is that reflected in your leadership? And collecting data is really, really important, because actually it's only if we collect data do we know the size of the problem and we can actually look to change it. And I have to say, historically, we're really good at collecting data from a national level, from the ONS data, but when it comes down to a parish level, it's a bit trickier. I mean, in some churches you can literally count diversity on one hand. But actually, I'll have to be honest with you, that's also true of some areas in the LDF as well. So it isn't just churches with that problem. It runs all the way through the diocese. And finally, E is for education. What are you doing to make sure you understand the key issues at play here? How are you educating yourselves? Have you started to open up conversations within your church? Probably about 2 months ago, for the very first time in my own Church of England church, we opened up a conversation about race. Now, I think to say it was hard for the ministers, to put it lightly, because actually there's quite a few people that ended up in tears, because he was absolutely shocked to learn of how people who did not look like him were feeling within that church and how they'd actually been treated that very morning. It was quite an eye-opener to him. So I think it's important for you to understand what is the experience of those that don't look like you within your church congregation. How are they being welcomed? How are they being included? It was a real eye-opening experience, and it's something that has started a journey. We now have a racial justice lead on our PCC to really move that work forward. And again, that would be a question to you. Do you have a racial justice lead on your PCC? Could you have one? And don't always look to the person of colour to lead this, because actually we need allies. It doesn't have to be a person of colour that leads this. It can be anybody. So in terms of the Kensington area's racial justice evaluation, it seeks to ask and focus on 3 key questions. Why is racial justice important? How will you evaluate it? And what will your next steps be? So there are 3 parts to it. The first one is the introduction and theology. Now, if anybody is not clear about the theology behind why racial justice is really important, on the racial justice page on the website, there is a really good paper on there that really speaks to that. So you're more than welcome to have a look at that. There is scriptural references all over, which really talks about why it's an imperative. And obviously Revelation 7:9 always features, but that there is, and also because it is actually a priority for the diocese. There is a reason why racial justice is a key priority for the Diocese of London. And the second one is audit. Now, the audit is actually really important because it's so important to know your own context. Because what will work in one church may not necessarily work in another. It really, really is important to understand your own church, local context. But equally as well, if you're a church that doesn't have diversity represented, yet there is a diversity around your area of 30%, let's say, for example, how are you tapping into that? What initiatives can you bring to bear that will bring them into your church? And actually, when you do that, it actually generally cuts across the other priorities. We've heard earlier about growing safer and growing younger. But actually, if there are initiatives that bring children in or bring families in, but I have to tell you, and I'll be honest with you, black parents are very different. Because actually, when they say to their children, go to church, believe me, they go to church. There isn't a debate. You will be going to church. So oftentimes, if you can engender difference, you will actually find that you will cut across some of these other key priorities within the diocese. And the other thing is questions for reflection. Where are you having the courageous conversations within your own context about race? Do people feel safe to have those conversations? Do your parishioners who are different to you, do they feel safe? Do they feel like they can talk to you about how they're actually feeling? How are they received? How are they welcomed? Is there a safe space for them to do that? And then the third part would be next steps. How are you going to take away, what are you going to do in your own church context that is different to what you've done before? How are you going to be different? So in terms of your next steps, you can consider revisiting the evaluation. I believe there's a 10-point evaluation for the Kensington area that's really worth looking at. Read, be informed on some of the issues. There's some really good books out there. And also talk to people. If actually talking to your own parishioners, you will learn a lot about what their lived experience looks and feels like. The 10-point plan we spoke about. We've got here, invite someone to speak at your church deanery. What I would say is before you invite somebody to speak at your church deanery, understand your own context. Understand the people within your church first. Because actually some of those speakers can actually come from internally. They don't necessarily need to be external speakers. We've got teaching and devoting a few Sundays for racial justice. Yes, I think there is a Racial Justice Sunday, but what I would also say is there is, again, on the Diocese of London website, there is a Racial Justice Prayer Bulletin that comes out on the 1st of every month. Now, that prayer bulletin guides the prayer points for racial justice throughout the month. That is something that anybody can sign up to, so please do feel free to go onto the website and sign up to that link, and that will automatically drop in your inbox. We also have the 22nd day of each month denoted as Racial Justice Day. And that sits in the cycle of prayer. So again, it gives you some pointers to pray on. So the thing I'd say is you are not alone in this journey. Please feel free to lean on the diocese. If there's anything that I can help you with, anybody in the team can help you with that sits on the Racial Justice Priority Group, feel free to ask. But this is a journey that all churches, all parishes are going through. And we're really just there to support. So finally, I think this is an Augustus saying, but I'm not entirely sure. But it's about what does it mean to truly belong. Accessibility is being able to get into the building. Diversity is about being invited to the table. Inclusion is about having a voice at the table. But belonging is having your voice heard at the table. And I think I'll leave it there.
This is working. Yeah, good. Steph, thank you so much for going through that. And so again, just to summarize the one ask, again, one ask under each of these priorities and ambitions. It is the invitation from the leadership of the area is for every parish to use the racial justice evaluation kit that Steph's been talking about, that's been developed by Alan and others. And it's been developed within our area to develop your own action plan as a result. Again, it's a relatively easy and painless, well, it's not never going to be painless, is it? But it's a relatively easy way to engage with this priority by using that as an evaluation to see where you are in this whole area. Now, just again, a reminder, that one of the reasons why this is such a priority for us is that within our city, within London, of course, 40% of people come from global majority heritage backgrounds. It's not true of every part of the country, but it is true for us within this diocese. That's why this is such a key area that we think of. And yet we are very aware that that is not represented in our clergy. We look around this room here, we don't have 40% of our clergy from global majority heritage backgrounds. We're better than we were 5 years ago, but we've got some way to go as well. Very often represented within our churches, but not always within our leadership, and that's why it's such a key issue. Again, we've got 5 minutes for some questions for Steph, or any observations, thoughts, comments as to how to engage better with this area. So please do raise a hand. Yeah, yeah. We're going to make sure these are made available. That'll be part of the summing up, so we'll send those out as well. Thanks, James. Yeah, great. Any other questions or comments, or any maybe your experience, things that you've done, which has been really helpful in this area as well, just to sort of share with others too. There's one at the back, Christopher. Come with her.
Something I was asking about on our new London clergy trip to St Paul's recently was intercultural liturgy. And over the break, some of us were talking about how liturgy shifts as new communities develop in our areas. And most of us probably have core, very long-term congregations that are used to a certain form of worship. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how we manage shifts in our liturgy as we notice shifts in our congregations. That's something I have to say I was commenting on, I'm not really seeing in our cathedral. I don't know if we're seeing it in our parish churches here.
No, thank you for that question. I think that is a task that's down to be looked at, and I don't think there's been much progress on that just yet, if I'm honest. It's something that national church have to lead on in terms of the direction, in terms of changing the liturgy. But so we've not really made much progress on that, but it is one of the action points that we need to do. And you have to imagine we've got a massive operational plan, and each thing is being done in stages. So we will get to that. But what we have done in the interim is we do have songs to serve. Now, these are different worship songs from different cultural backgrounds that actually you can bring into your own services. There is a link on the website, which literally songs to serve, which will be different intercultural worship songs, which you can use.
Steph, you joined the Directors of Mission not so long ago, and you talked about music and the choice of music.
Yes.
Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it's really quite interesting because music in the church context can have so many different connotations to so many different people, and culturally it does make a huge difference. Now, I know there are some people that like the traditional, and I have to be honest, there are certain sections of Black Caribbean females who do love the old traditional hymns. But I have to be honest, for some though, it can be quite boring. Some people don't always like the traditional hymns. They want something a little bit more modern and a bit more, engaging. So it's about trying to find that balance between the different songs that people like. And if you're a church that focuses mostly on traditional hymns, how does that appeal to the youth? And that's what you've got to think about. How is that engaging? We talk about wanting to have younger people within our congregations. Is that the music that attracts the youth of today?
Probably time for one more. Anybody else wants to comment? If not, we can move forward. Richard's on next. We can go straight onto that. Stephanie, thank you so much indeed. Thank you.